All right, so today we're going to deep dive into something that I think a lot of people struggle with, and that's budgeting.
Okay.
And to kind of help us with this, we're going to be looking at an episode of the Fayzzonomics podcast.
Okay.
And they have a really interesting take on personal finance and budgeting and kind of why traditional budgeting doesn't work.
Yeah, and it's funny because they don't just talk about why traditional budgeting doesn't work. They also offer some alternatives.
Right.
Which is really cool. And they kind of start by dissecting the psychology of why those old school budgets tend to backfire on people.
Yeah. Okay. So let's get into that. Why do people have such a hard time sticking to a budget?
Well, they make this point about how a lot of times budgets are based on like an idealized version of ourselves.
Right.
Where we, never spend money we shouldn't, or we never go over.
Right.
And it just doesn't really reflect like how humans actually behave.
Right.
We have emotions and things happen in life.
Yeah.
Life is unpredictable.
Yeah, it's like when you try to go on a really restrictive diet. It works for a while, and then you just kind of go crazy.
Exactly. You binge. Yeah. And so Fayzzonomics, they challenge that traditional approach.
Yeah.
And they say instead of restricting ourselves, we should focus on intention.
Okay.
It's what they call value-based spending.
Okay, so what is value-based spending?
So it's all about aligning your spending with the things that are important to you.
Okay.
So like, let's say traveling is really important to you. With value-based spending, you wouldn't feel bad about spending money on a trip.
Okay.
Because it aligns with your values.
So it's more like making sure that your money is going towards things that are important to you or that make you happy or help you reach your goals.
Exactly. And that's where those real-life stories that they share on Fayzzonomics really come in.
Oh.
They actually talked to a freelancer named Mike who had a really hard time sticking to a traditional budget.
Okay.
Because his income was so unpredictable.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So what he did was instead of trying to budget, he decided to just build a buffer fund.
Right.
So he had this cushion of money to help him manage his finances.
Right, and that kind of ties into what they were saying about cash flow management.
Yeah, exactly.
So instead of, like looking at every single transaction, it's more about looking at like the overall flow of money.
Exactly.
Like coming in and going out.
Yeah, and Fayzzonomics gets into the nitty-gritty of like how to actually track that effectively.
Okay.
Like using apps and tools, and they actually recommend different things depending on like where you live in the world.
Okay, yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, so like for people in the US, they recommend things like Mint and White App.
Okay.
Which are really good for visualizing your spending. And then in Canada, they mentioned Wealthsimple a lot.
Right.
Which is cool because it combines like spending and investing all in one place.
Yeah, and I remember them talking about Wally as a good option for expats who have to deal with multiple currencies.
Right, because that adds a whole other layer of complexity.
Right, yeah, exactly.
So yeah, they really get into the details of like finding a system that works for you.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So it's not just about like, using the right app or whatever, but it's about like finding something that actually fits your life.
Exactly.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
It's amazing how like, sometimes these small little details or changes in your approach can completely change how you think about money.
Yeah, for sure.
But it sounds like Fayzzonomics isn't just about finding the right apps.
No.
They're advocating for like a complete mindset shift.
Right. It's not just about the tools.
Yeah.
It's about how you think about your money.
So are they saying like don't track anything, just like let go of all control and like hope for the best?
Not necessarily. They actually talk about a few other strategies that can be helpful.
Okay.
One of them is the pay yourself first method.
Okay, I've heard of that.
Yeah. Have you?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's all about like prioritizing your savings.
Right.
Like right from the start.
Isn't that what you're supposed to do with budgeting anyway?
Well, yeah, but a lot of times with traditional budgeting, saving is like the last thing you think about.
Right.
You allocate all your money to your expenses, and then whatever is left over, you save.
Right, yeah.
But with pay yourself first, it's like flipping that script. You decide how much you want to save, and then you take it out of your income like right away.
So you make it like a non-negotiable part of your routine?
Exactly. And Fayzzonomics actually recommends like automating that as much as possible.
Oh.
So like in the US, they talk about 401k contribution, where the money is taken out of your paycheck before you even see it.
Yeah. So you don't even have to think about it.
Exactly.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, and in Canada, they mentioned RSP and TFSA contributions, which are kind of similar.
Right. Automatic contributions, so you don't even have to think about it.
Yep, and in Dubai, they talked about how expats will set up automatic transfers to offshore savings accounts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's all about making saving a habit.
Right.
Rather than something you have to actively remember to do.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So, okay, so we've talked about pay yourself first. And we talked about cash flow management.
Right.
What about this idea of the anti-budget?
Oh, yeah, that's a fun one.
Yeah, it sounds kind of rebellious.
It kind of is. It's like throwing the whole idea of traditional budgeting out the window.
So what do you do instead?
So this approach was popularized by this financial expert named Paula Pant.
Okay.
And basically, you decide on a percentage of your income that you want to save, and then you just spend the rest guilt-free.
Wait, so no more like stressing about whether you can afford to go out to dinner or buy a new pair of shoes?
Nope. It's all about giving yourself permission to enjoy your money.
Wow, that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
But I feel like that would require a lot of self-discipline.
It definitely takes some practice, but that's where understanding your values comes in.
Right.
If you know what's important to you, you're less likely to waste money on things that don't really matter.
That's true.
Yeah, so it's like a shift in focus.
Okay, but wouldn't this approach be harder for someone who's on a tight budget?
That's a good point. It's not necessarily for everyone.
Right.
Like if you're really struggling to make ends meet, it might not be realistic to save a large percentage of your income.
Right.
But even then, you can still apply the principles of the anti-budget.
Okay.
Like by focusing on your values and giving yourself permission to enjoy the money you do have.
So it's about like finding what works for your specific situation.
Exactly. There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Right. It seems like Fayzzonomics really emphasizes that like there's no magic formula.
Yeah, it's about finding what works for you.
So we've talked about cash flow management, the pay yourself first method, and the anti-budget approach.
Right.
Are there any other alternative strategies that Fayzzonomics talks about?
They mention one more that might appeal to people who like a bit more structure?
Okay.
It's called zero-based budgeting.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that.
Have you?
Yeah, but it always seems kind of intimidating.
Yeah, it can be a bit intense. But it can also be very effective.
Okay, how does it work?
So basically with zero-based budgeting, you assign every dollar you earn a specific purpose.
Okay.
So like you start each month with a clean slate and you allocate your money to different categories.
Okay.
Like needs, wants, savings, debt repayment.
So every dollar has a job to do.
Exactly.
That sounds pretty organized.
It is. It's a great way to make sure you're not overspending.
I could see how that would be really helpful for like entrepreneurs or people with irregular income.
Absolutely. It forces you to be really mindful of where your money's going.
Right.
And Fayzzonomics mentions that this method is pretty popular among high-income earners and business owners.
That makes sense.
Yeah, they need that extra level of control to manage their finances effectively.
It's really interesting to hear about all these different approaches to budgeting.
Yeah, for sure.
It's like Fayzzonomics is really challenging the way we think about money and giving us permission to like break free from those traditional rules.
Exactly. It's about finding what works for you and your life.
Yeah, I love that.
Me too.
You know, it's really interesting because it feels like Fayzzonomics is kind of encouraging us to look at money in like a more holistic way. It's not just about the numbers.
Right.
It's about how our finances like fit into our overall lives.
Yeah, exactly. And they really stress that it's not about like achieving some like perfect ideal of financial success or whatever.
Right.
It's more about creating a system that like actually works for you and supports like your well-being.
Yeah, I think that's so important because so often we get caught up in this idea of like keeping up with the Joneses.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like comparing ourselves to other people.
Totally.
And Fayzzonomics is kind of reminding us that like we need to define success for ourselves.
Absolutely. And part of that is like letting go of the guilt and shame that we often associate with money.
Yeah.
You know, like traditional budgeting can sometimes make us feel like we're failing.
Right.
If we don't stick to the plan perfectly.
Yeah. I've definitely been there, like beating myself up over an impulse purchase or, you know, feeling like I'm not saving enough.
Yeah, totally. And Fayzzonomics is really advocating for like a much more like compassionate and flexible approach.
Okay.
It's like they're saying, you know, there's no right or wrong way to manage your money. What matters is finding a system that works for you.
Yeah. And allows you to like actually live the life that you want.
Exactly.
So as we're kind of wrapping up this deep dive, I'm curious, what's resonating most with you?
Yeah.
Is there something from Fayzzonomics that you're thinking about trying out?
Yeah, or maybe like, has this sparked any new ideas for you?
Yeah.
About your own finances?
For me personally, I think the concept of value-based spending has really stuck with me.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder to be more intentional with my spending and to make sure that my money is going towards things that I actually care about.
Yeah, and those stories from Fayzzonomics, like, Mike and his buffer fund,
Right.
I think those really illustrate, like, how these strategies can actually work in real life. It's not just like theory, it's about finding practical solutions
Right.
that you can apply to your own situation.
Absolutely. So to our listeners out there, we encourage you to take some time to think about your own financial habits and goals. What's working for you? What could be improved? And are there any of these alternative strategies that we talked about that might help you create a more fulfilling and less stressful relationship with money?
Yeah, and don't be afraid to experiment, find what works for you.
Right, because personal finance is a journey.
It is.
It's not a destination.
It's ongoing.
Yeah, there's always something new to learn.
Always.
And it's never too late to make positive changes.
Exactly.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
See ya!